Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're cutting through the noise around generative AI. We're going to focus on where it really matters.
Yeah,
High stakes medical diagnosis.
exactly. For a long time, we've talked about AI as this specialized tool. Maybe it analyzes one type of scan or helps with billing.
A niche thing.
Right. But the source material we have today suggests GPT-5 is something totally different. It's positioning itself as a generalist multimodal reasoner.
That's a huge claim. What does generalist multimodal reasoner even mean in a hospital setting?
It means it handles the whole picture. I mean, not just one isolated task. In medicine, you can't just read the patient's story or just look at their labs or just the CT
You
scan.
have to put it all together.
You have to synthesize all three. And this model, it attempts to replicate that full integration of, all this messy, heterogeneous data.
Okay, so let's unpack this study. Our mission here is to really analyze this unified, rigorous evaluation that put GPT-5 against its predecessor, GPT-4o.
And critically, against actual human medical experts.
Right. We want to know if this model is actually ready to be a core component in how doctors work.
And that's the whole game. This shift from task-specific little models to these generalist LLMs, it's a defining moment. And the way they tested it was really key.
For protocol.
The protocol, they used a unified approach based on zero-shot chain of thought, or COTI.
Okay, that sounds a bit academic, but I think the methodology is maybe the most important part of this whole story. So why is that COTI approach so much more meaningful than just, a multiple choice test?
Well, it forces transparency.
Yeah.
And it tests true understanding. Instead of just picking A, B, C, or D, the model first had to write out a detailed, free-form rationale.
So it has to show its work.
It has to show its work, just like a physician would, arguing through the evidence, ruling things out. And only then was it allowed to commit to a final answer. So it's testing reasoning, not just memory.
And to really challenge that reasoning, they didn't just use one test. They used a huge battery of data sets.
Oh yeah, they absolutely covered the whole breadth of what you need to know. For text-only knowledge, they used MedQA, the big MMLU medical suite, and of course the gold standard for clinical readiness, the USMLE self-assessment.
Wait, let's pause on the jargon there for a second. We hear MMLU thrown around a lot. What does that actually test?
Right. MMLU is the massive multitask language understanding benchmark. So MMLU Medical is basically a brutal exam for breadth. It tests the model across dozens of subjects in medicine anatomy, clinical practice, you name it, just to see if that foundational knowledge is solid.
Got it. So that's the breadth. But what about the hard stuff, where you have to connect the text to, say, an image?
That's where they brought in the multimodal tests, VQA-RAD, which is all about visual questions in radiology, and crucially, the challenging and comprehensive MedExpert QA.
And they use both the text and the multimodal parts of that one.
They had to really hit those integrated real-world scenarios where the data is messy.
Okay, ground rules set. Let's look at the numbers. The text-based performance first.
The numbers are, well, they're undeniably strong. On MedQA, that's the simplified four-option US-style test, GPT-5 hit 95.84% accuracy.
And for context, how much better is that?
That is a 4.80% absolute improvement over GPT-4o. It's a massive generational jump in just the raw knowledge base.
And on MMOU, it was basically hitting the ceiling, right? Almost saturated with textbook knowledge. But the key insight, I think, is where those improvements showed up.
Precisely. The gains weren't in pure factual recall, where old models were already pretty good. The improvements were most pronounced in categories that need a higher reasoning complexity.
For example.
So medical genetics saw a jump of 4.00%, and clinical knowledge went up by 2.64%. This tells us it isn't just retaining more facts, it's getting better at synthesizing them to solve tricky problems.
And that better reasoning ability really gets proven out when we look at the USMLE scores. That's the test for actual clinical competence.
Absolutely. The average score for GPT-5 across all three USMLE steps hit 95.22%. That's up a solid 2.88% from GPT-4o, and it's far above what a human needs to pass.
And if you break down the steps, the biggest improvement wasn't even on the basic science stuff. It was on step 2.
Yes. That 4.17% gain on step 2 is maybe the most important finding in this whole text section. Step 2 is almost all clinical decision-making, patient management, treatment protocols.
So it's the what do you do next part of medicine.
Exactly. And that improved score just confirms the chain of thought reasoning is fundamentally working better in GPT-5. It can handle those nuanced patient scenarios much more effectively.
Okay, but here's where it gets, for me, really interesting. The multimodal breakthrough. Most past evaluations were just text, but real medicine is text plus images.
This is the true test of that whole generalist reasoner idea. And on the MedExpert QA multimodal subset, the one designed to be the hardest GPT-5 showed a dramatic leap.
When you say dramatic, give us the numbers. How big was this jump in its ability to look at a CT scan and connect it to the patient's chart?
We're talking about gains of over 29%, plus 29.26% in reasoning, and plus 26.18% in understanding over GPT-4o. That is massive. It's just a fundamental overhaul in how the model is integrating vision and text. It's just so much better at aligning the visual cues with the words describing them.
I mean, a nearly 30% improvement between versions is almost unheard of. What was GPT-4 struggling with so badly that GPT-5 just completely fixed?
I think it's the complexity of MedExpert QA. It's designed to break older models. It'll give you ambiguous visual evidence next to a really complicated patient history. A subtle finding on a scan that only makes sense if you see one specific lab result.
And GPT-4 would get lost.
It often struggled with that synthesis. GPT-5's architecture seems way better at maintaining context across both modalities, so it doesn't just focus on the image and forget the history, or vice versa.
But there was that one interesting anomaly in the data, wasn't there? On VQA-RAD, the radiology-specific test, the trend went the other way.
Yes, that's a fascinating little detail. On VQA-RAD, which is a smaller, very focused radiology dataset, GPT-5 actually scored a bit lower at 70.92%. And its smaller variant, GPT-5 Mini, beat it with 74.90%.
So why would the big, sophisticated model lose to the smaller one on a visual test?
It gets back to that idea of generalization versus specialization. The smaller model might have just gotten really, really good at that one specific data set. It overfit in a good way for the test, but the researchers suggest the bigger GPT-5 might be doing something they call conservative reasoning.
What does that mean, conservative reasoning?
It means that if the model is uncertain, especially in a high-stakes clinical setting, it might default to a safer, maybe less definitive answer that could lower its score on a purely objective benchmark, but in the real world.
In the real world, you'd rather it be cautious than confidently wrong.
Exactly. It's a fascinating trade-off to see happening in the data.
Okay, that nuance is key. But let's get to the ultimate litmus test. How does it stack up against actual human doctors?
This is the aha moment. This is what really validates the whole thing. Previously, GPT-4o performed below pre-licensed human medical experts. There were gaps of anywhere from 5 to 16%. It was still playing catch-up.
And GPT-5 didn't just catch up.
It didn't even come close to just catching up. On that really hard MedExpert QA multimodal test, GPT-5 surpassed the human experts by substantial margins.
Oh, substantial.
It was 24.23% higher than the experts in multimodal reasoning and a staggering 29.40% higher in multimodal understanding.
That is just, it's a staggering finding. This isn't just closing a gap. The model went from being maybe comparable to a human to demonstrating what the paper calls clear superhuman proficiency on these tests.
It tells us that the vision language reasoning pipeline in GPT-5 is integrating all this disparate evidence images, text, labs, history with a speed and reliability that even trained clinicians just can't consistently match, at least under these standardized test conditions.
Let's make this real for everyone listening. We have to look at the case study they highlighted, MM1993, to see this reasoning in action.
It's a genuinely complex, high-acuity case. So you have a 45-year-old man challenging social history v. drug use, heavy alcohol use, signs of scurvy, so severe malnutrition, he's found unconscious, and he's vomiting.
And the initial labs are all over the place.
Exactly. His lipase is elevated, which points to acute pancreatitis, and his MCV, the size of his red blood cells, is 120, which is extremely high. That points to all the chronic issues like alcoholism and nutritional problems. The model has to see all of that at once.
But then the situation changes quickly, which is where diagnostics get really hard.
Precisely. A few hours later, a new critical sign emerges. Suprasternal crepitus. That's air trapped under the skin around his neck. And now he's vomiting blood. And they give the model a CT scan image.
Okay, walk us through GPT-5's thinking, its chain of thought.
It was textbook perfect. Step 1, identify the acute alcoholic pancreatitis from the labs in history. Step 2, connect the dots. The repeated violent vomiting plus the new suprasternal crepitus, which means air is leaking from inside his chest, that immediately points to a life-threatening complication. Esophageal perforation, Bohr-Haave syndrome.
And that one connection is what drives the whole decision.
Yes. The model completely bypassed other plausible but less urgent options, like giving him anti-nausea meds or just supportive care. It went straight for the urgent diagnostic step needed to save his life. The gastrograph and swallow study to confirm the perforation.
So it synthesized everything. The chronic history, the acute labs, the visual scan, and that one specific physical finding, and came to the exact decision an expert would, but maybe even faster.
This study really provides a resounding affirmation. APT-5 shows substantial consistent gains, especially in these reasoning-heavy multimodal tasks. It really does have the potential to be a reliable core component for clinical decision support.
And there's always a but, we have to add the necessary caveat. This is a controlled study.
Absolutely, we have to emphasize this. These results are from idealized, standardized testing environments. They're clean benchmarks. They don't capture the real-world messiness, the uncertainty, the conflicting information, the chaos of an actual ER.
So this needs more testing before it's at the bedside.
It absolutely requires prospective clinical trials. We need extensive testing to ensure it's safe, transparent, and ethical before we deploy it in a hospital.
That is the right level of caution. But what just stands out to me is the sheer scale of the performance leap. I mean, if AI can now demonstrably exceed the performance of pre-licensed medical professionals at synthesizing this kind of complex data under these tough test conditions, it just forces you to change your perspective.
It raises a pretty essential question about the future of the medical profession itself.
Exactly. And that's the thought we want to leave with you. If AI can handle the diagnostic recall, the synthesis of massive data sets, and spotting subtle visual clues with superhuman proficiency, then how do the roles of future physicians need to adapt?
Right. What becomes the core value of the human doctor?
Will it be less about being a data processor and more about the things AI can't touch? Empathy, navigating real-world uncertainty, dealing with the patient's socioeconomic barriers, and the ethical application of these powerful tools at the bedside.
That dynamic is what's going to define the next decade of medicine.
We'll let you mull that over. That's our deep dive for today. We'll catch you next time.